Your Excellencies, friends, my name is Vikas Pota. I'm the Chief Executive of the Varkey GEMS Foundation. My role is to welcome you to this opening first official event of the inaugural Global Education and Skills Forum, which we hope in the future will become the Davos of education. This event, we've had over 500 delegates register. We have 18 country delegations. We have, and I'd particularly like to note, His Excellency, the President of Burundi, His Excellency, the Vice President of South Sudan, His Excellency, President Obasanjo of Nigeria, and many other dignitaries who have assembled here tonight and over the next 2 days to participate in this very important event. Although it sounds impressive that we have 500 delegates registered, I also have to make a point to say that, in fact, we have viewers with our media partner, the Huffington Post, all over the world, in the millions watching tonight's event. I'd like to welcome them to this event also, and to the first official event of the Global Education and Skills Forum. It's also an opportune moment to thank our co-hosts. We have UNESCO, the UN Body for Education, the Commonwealth Business Council, the UAE Ministry for Education, and of course, my colleagues from GEMS Education. Welcome to you all. Last night, we took the opportunity to listen to one of the most renowned political leaders in the modern era. We took the opportunity of Prime Minister Tony Blair being in Dubai, coincidentally. If you remember, if you recollect, when he first came to, before he first came to office in 1996, a journalist asked him, when you come to government, what will be your 3 key policy priorities? And at that point, he very quickly, as he does, said, my priorities are very simple. My first 3 priorities are education, education, and education. Over the next 10 years that he was in government, Britain and the UK saw major education reforms take place. And yesterday we heard from him that some of the challenges associated with education reform, which I think were very insightful. He has the privilege of actually post office speaking his mind, and I think he did so yesterday. However, we must note that London, the UK, is part of the developed world. It is the financial center, one of the financial centers of the world. As the chief executive of a charitable foundation, I have to put these statistics in front of you to provide context for tonight's event. We know that between 2008 and 2010, the number of children out of school in Africa went up by 1.6 million. We know that there are 250 million children who today cannot read or write. We know that there are almost 1 billion people who are illiterate. And we also know that today, not tomorrow, today, we need 1.2 million new teachers. When we talk about public-private partnerships, when we speak about meeting challenges together, this is what we're speaking about. The words PPP, or public-private partnerships, have often been taken without context and seen in a vacuum. Today, we listen to one of the foremost influential figures in our world when it comes to policy. I'd like to welcome, and please join me in welcoming, President Clinton to this event.
Thank you, Vikas. Thank you. I want to begin by thanking you and Sonny and Dino and Jay Varkey and the Varkey GEMS Foundation. Thank you for the work you do in giving quality education to more than 100,000 children in the GEMS schools. And thank you for this foundation and your commitment to positively impact the educations of 100,000 children in developing countries for every 1 child in your schools. I think you'll keep that commitment, and I think millions of people will be better off as a result. Thank all of you for coming to this important event. I wish I could be there with you in person. It's cold here in New York and warm in Dubai. I envy my friend Tony Blair for being there with you in person last night. I'd like to talk a little bit about the significance of this meeting and the whole idea of public-private partnerships in education. First of all, let me begin by saying that one of the great good news stories of the early 21st century, in spite of the economic problems that we've had, all the political upheavals, one of the great good news stories is the explosive rise in non-governmental organizations that are trying to provide the cement for these public-private partnerships. You have former President Obasanjo from Nigeria there. He's a good friend of mine, and we worked on AIDS when I was president and he was. I was recently in Nigeria talking in part about the work our foundation is doing there in a public-private partnership with the government of Nigeria to save 1 million children from the ravages of waterborne diseases that kill so many kids under 5 and keep them from ever going to school. This whole effort in education and health, in development, in fighting climate change is sweeping the world. It's actually caused us, I think, to rethink our whole idea of good citizenship in the 21st century world. When I was a boy growing up, the definition of what it meant to be a good citizen was pretty straightforward. You were supposed to stay in school as long as you could and do as well as you could. Then you were supposed to find work and give an honest day's labor for the money you were paid. If you married, you were supposed to have a strong family and try to be a responsible parent. And you were supposed to be an informed citizen and vote in every election. Today, that's not enough. We all have to find some way to give back to people beyond voting and beyond our own children, because the world is so interdependent. Our fates are so bound up together. We have to create a world with more shared prosperity and more shared responsibilities. A world in which we can work together to push back all the threats that we face, from economic inequality to financial, political instability to cyber terrorism to global warming. It should begin with education. We cannot build a world of shared prosperity when the vast majority of the world's people over the next 30 years are going to be living in what are now developing countries. When already we have 100 million or more children who don't go to school and another 200 million who go to school without trained teachers or learning materials or access to the internet education sites like the Khan Academy, which make up for some of the physical shortcomings of circumstances for kids who can do that. That's what the Jim's Academy Foundation is dedicated to doing, and what I know you're there to talk about today. I wanted to say just a few words about the experiences that I have seen myself. Uganda is the second fastest growing country in the world. The average family still has 7 children there. The government cannot possibly afford to educate all of its kids. But one of our partners in a public-private partnership through the Clinton Global Initiative is the Building Tomorrow's Academy movement. They go into villages in Uganda, work with the villagers, and build the schools, in part designed by the people who live in the villages, relieve the government of all that cost, and they do it at roughly 25% of the cost the governments have. Then the government can spend its money sending in better trained teachers and learning materials. It works. I've been in those schools. I've seen it. That's the kind of thing we need to be doing everywhere. In Haiti, where I have spent much of the last 4 years working, when I began, Haiti, the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere, still had, sadly, a form of child indentured servitude called the Restavek system, where parents would sell for a pittance, as little as $40 sometimes, their children into long-term contracts to work for other families who promised to educate them but almost never did. But simply because they didn't have enough money to feed and educate their children. And the parents were having to pay tuition, as they often do in Africa and other poor places, to send their kids to school. Since the new government in Haiti has come in, the number of children in primary school has gone from 54 to 88%. And the amount of work that we are doing now through the non-governmental sector has helped to reduce the number of children being sold into indentured servitude simply because their parents can now feed and educate all the kids in their families. This is a phenomenal opportunity and a phenomenal responsibility. In the poorest countries of the world, just 1 year of schooling can add up to 10% a year to earning capacity for life. And since many of the fastest growing countries are now in places that had been written off and left behind, we have to reimagine what our responsibilities and our opportunities are. In this decade, 6 of the world's fastest growing economies are in Africa. In the coming decade, it's projected that 7 of the fastest growing economies in the world will be in Africa. We need to help them through public-private partnerships to rapidly scale up their own human capital by educating their children. We see the same thing in poor countries in Southeast Asia. We know what will happen. Even in China, we find problems in rural areas where education and economic opportunity have not kept up with what is going on in the urban areas. In Vietnam, when I normalized relations with them in 1995, the per capita income was about $300 a year. On the 15th anniversary of our normalization, I went back to Vietnam. It was about $1,500 a year. Pretty soon they will raise their standard of living to the point that a lot of the lower skill wages that they inherited from other countries like China will begin to go away, and they'll have to have more education. You see this everywhere in the world. In the Middle East, where you are now, there are children who have been left out and left behind who can be part of serious efforts governments are making to diversify their economy, to use their oil wealth today to create a whole different society tomorrow. This different society will have many different kinds of skill requirements, many different kinds of jobs, will not be able to rely simply on imported labor to do routine things. We need this commitment to education everywhere, and almost everywhere. Success will require a level of public-private partnership never before achieved. It is projected that by 2050, 86% of the world's children will be living in what are now developing countries. There is no way that governments alone or international aid flows alone will be able to provide those children with the quality of education they need to be full participants in a global society. This is especially important for women and girls, and it's one reason I'm grateful that the GEMS Foundation is participating in the UN efforts on this. We know that across all cultures, all religious faiths, all economic and social systems, the one thing that lifts economic standing and slows the birth rate to a sustainable level is getting all the girls in school and giving young women access to the labor market. Many countries recognize this. For several years now in Saudi Arabia, there have been more women than men in institutions of higher education. I see this coming, but it will happen faster, better, more smoothly, in a way that is more tied to the economy in places that have very, very vigorous public-private partnerships. I enjoy the work that I do on these subjects around the world. I think we're making a real difference. The great thing about a public-private partnership is that you have the dedication to the public interest that government embodies and the dedication to keeping score and getting concrete results that is a necessity in the private sector. We are just beginning what I am convinced will be a very exciting story throughout the 21st century, and I thank all of you for your dedication to its success. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, President Clinton. We now have the opportunity to ask questions to President Clinton. I referred earlier that we have a partnership with the Huffington Post where we've run a competition, as it were, for people to come forward and ask questions that have always been on their minds to such a globally renowned figure. We have selected a few which we will pose to you, President Clinton. The first question that I wanted to take was by someone who on Twitter is called Jenny Ludd. Her question is, what are the best avenues of education for a young girl who is interested in science to have an impact on a global level?
Well, first, I think it's important, depending on where you live, to maximize the opportunities that exist where you live. Secondly, I think it's important to be connected, which you can be through the internet, to various science platforms that will enable you to learn and share information and form partnerships with people who may not be there with you. And thirdly, I think it's important to form groups who share your interest and your commitment and engage in concrete projects. Let me just give you one example. One of our CGI partners has a network of global business schools, the HULT Business School Network. Every year they sponsor a contest to solve a problem, and they invite university students from around the world to participate. Last year, one of the problems was involving solar energy. And the issue was that the cost of photovoltaic cells has gone down a great deal, and therefore more and more communities, schools, even countries are trying to adopt a distributed power strategy, but no one's ever done enough in 1 year. So how could you economically put up 20 million photovoltaic cells in a country in a year? The winning team was from New York University, but the campus was in Abu Dhabi. And the teammates were, this is very interesting, 4 students, one from India, one from Pakistan, one from China, one from Taiwan. So they represented, those 4 young people did, both sides of 2 long-raging conflicts. And when they were introduced, I said, "Are you sure you want a picture with me to go in your local paper?" And they said, "Oh, we're so over that. We're living in the future." That's what I think we have to do. You have to look for opportunities that are available and make sure that young women, including you, can be a part of them. I could give you lots of other examples of that, but I think the fact that there are so many web platforms, so many internet platforms that enable young people to learn at a globally competitive level and then participate in projects should be maximized in every country in the world.
Thank you very much, sir. The next question is posed by someone called Jackie Lamping on Twitter again, who asked the question, what are the best examples of public-private education solutions and how can we replicate success globally?
Let's start in a developed country. In the United States, I think the best examples are first Teach for America, an NGO which recruits the best young people to go into our schools, particularly those that have a lot of low-income children, and teach at a very high level, even if just for a few years. They find idealistic and incredibly intelligent young people, train them to go do this work, and support them while they're there. Another example that I love are our charter schools run by the KIPP academies. That's KIPP if you want to look it up on the internet. The charter schools in America are part of the public school system, but they're relieved of a lot of the requirements that ordinary schools have to design unique educational environments to fit the kids that are in that school. And the KIPP academies have been able to replicate this excellence. They go into places where the children come from families without any education, where there's a lot of fraying of the social fabric, and they have a very defined culture. They devote more time to work on the weekends and after schools, and they get fabulous results. I'll give you one other example that I have seen in our country. The great tennis player, Andre Agassi, when he retired, he and his wife, Steffi Graf, devoted themselves to a school in the poorest neighborhood in Las Vegas, Nevada. And they built a school that was for the family. That is, the young people who came had to have their parents sign off on a statement of what the values of the school were. And they all, the children and the families, follow the values. Then the school's open every night and all weekend, and the parents come in and get training in how to maximize their use of computers, how to continue their own education, how to support their children's education. And even though this school was in the poorest neighborhood in Las Vegas, it was the first school in the state to receive a top rating. So it's a very serious thing. I've seen this work over and over and over again. I mentioned the Uganda schools early, the Building Tomorrow Academies. I was in one of those schools recently, and I was just completely astonished at how great. I visited 2 classrooms, and both of those teachers, I would have given anything if they had taught my daughter when she was of that age. And it was clear to me that once you lift the cost of building the schools in the communities, providing the facilities, and a country with limited resources, and let them put their education resources into actually training the teachers and preparing them to go into the classroom, that you got better results. And the school was really nice. And as I said in my opening remarks, it only cost 25% as much for the community to build it with the Building Tomorrow's group as it would have cost the government anyway. So they had a lot of money left over to pay teachers, to entice them to teach, and to train them to teach well.
Sir, as a follow-on to that question, last October at our advisory board meeting, you encouraged us to look at teacher training as a particular avenue of expanding our foundation's work. Are teachers important in that context? And how should delivery of teacher training be geared for the future?
Well, you may know more about that than I do. But I think, first of all, I want to thank your foundation for your commitment to teacher training. I believe that it is really important if done well. It can't just be an afterthought, and there are lots of examples in the world of how it's exciting. But I think the 2 things I would say is that, first, I think it's important to work closely with the local authorities, the education ministries in every country, and to identify clearly what the biggest needs are, the biggest shortcomings are. And secondly, I think it's important to get the teachers involved in a virtual community. We need to make sure that all these teachers have access to all the international websites that are important. I think they've got to have computers. They've got to have power sources that keep them running even in remote areas. They've got to have places where they can go and get answers to questions as it unfolds. We have to use technology, even in those places that can't participate in the one laptop per child movement globally yet, we ought to make sure that the teachers are connected.
Thank you, sir. We now have a question actually from the audience. We have a young lady. Her name is Sophia. She's 15 years old and studies at the GEMS Dubai American Academy. Can I ask her for her question?
I've been really inspired by the story of Malala in Pakistan. What are some solutions to improving access to education for girls in South Asia?
Her question, President Clinton, was that she's very inspired by the story of Malala in Pakistan. What do you suggest are solutions to improving access to education for girls, especially in South Asia?
Well, first of all, I think that all of us who are outside of the arena where so many of these girls are still being held back should do two things. I think we should support NGOs who are committed to going into these areas and creating educational opportunities. And then I think we should, for those children who are being thwarted, whose own families will support them, I think we should bring them out if necessary and guarantee all of them access to education somewhere else. You know, after the young woman Malala was shot in Pakistan, there was a young woman in Afghanistan who was 17 years old, first in her class in her school. She wanted to become a doctor. Her parents got her into an arranged marriage, which she did not want to go through with. She wanted to go to school. And her husband-to-be said he would never permit that because she'd be outside the house and in contact with too many strangers, and her education was over. She went on top of her family's house, jumped off the roof and tried to kill herself and broke her back. And in an unprecedented move, the gender court, which resolves such issues in Afghanistan, ruled that the contract for marriage should be voided. But this young girl is now living at home with a broken back and barely mobile. I think we have to create opportunities for girls in country when we can through NGOs that are supported, but a lot of them live in very hostile environments, and for those we should have an avenue out, hoping that someday they'll be able to go back and contribute to their country. But I think these are very personal stories, and these kids have dreams, and they can't wait for all the rest of us to improve everything in the world for them. We ought to have an international effort to guarantee their maximum education at home whenever possible, and if not, if they can get out wherever we can send them that they want to go. And I'm really committed to this and would spend a lot of time to do it. Malala won everyone's heart, but that girl in Afghanistan broke my heart. I am the grandson of a grandmother who had to work to support her family, a mother who had to work to support me and my brother. And you all know where Hillary stands on that, and she and our daughter Chelsea, who are now fully participating in our foundation, have spent a lot of their lives working to advance the cause of women's education. So I think, quite apart from all the usual economic arguments and demographic arguments, this is a deeply human drama that will play out in the 21st century. And we ought to give people like Malala and people like this young woman in in Afghanistan, the chance to get an education at home or abroad, no matter what kind of effort it takes.
President Clinton, thank you very much for your time. Your words have been insightful. Your leadership on this issue is important to us, And I'm sure the audience in this auditorium over here and those online cherish your words. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Vikas. Thank you. Thank you.